Over across the pond, Trump took it to NATO. He made a speech over there. They've got a brand new headquarters building that is just out of this world. The way Trump opined on it was to say, I don't even want to know what this building cost. I didn't even ask them what it cost. Because Trump knows they didn't pay for it, we did. Trump jumped in there chilly about all the NATO members still in arrears in their dues to NATO. Most people probably know by now, but for those of you who don't, NATO dues are not paid to NATO. Member nations in NATO must instead pledge to spend at least 2% of their GDP on the defense of their own country. There are many NATO nations that are in arrears. This 2% is an annual figure. Some of these nations in NATO haven't paid in years. Trump called them out. Other NATO members were standing there, and these sniveling little leftists all began snickering at Trump while he was calling them out. But he was, in this speech, and we've got sound bites of it coming up, he was the Donald Trump of the campaign. Moving on now across the pond to the NATO meeting, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Trump had a meeting with the NATO people at their new, brand spanking new headquarters. Now, folks, just a brief aside here. What does NATO do? I mean, we all think we know, but what would you say, Mr. Snerdley, if a political neophyte approached you with genuine curiosity and wanted to know what NATO does? What is it? Good. Exactly right. Snerdley has it down pat. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is an organization formed in the aftermath of the Cold War. European nations and other Western democracies aligning to defend and protect each other from Soviet aggression. This is prior to the Soviets becoming the Russians. Well, the Soviets have always been Russians, but now they're not called Soviets because there isn't any Soviet Union. Putin is trying to reassemble the Soviet Union. It's now called the Russian Federation. And member nations love being members because it basically means the United States is going to defend them. NATO member states are required as dues to pay 2%. Well, that's the wrong word. They don't pay anything. They're required as dues to spend minimum 2% of their GDP every year on their own defense. Most member nations have not been doing so. Some have not spent any on defense. Some are in the 1% range, 1.9. United States is at 3.3%, by the way. A couple other nations are at 2%, two above, but most are beneath. Germany's 1.9%. Germany's not even meeting its requirements. This is very crucial because it allows all these European nations to not have to spend anything on defense as a percentage of their budgets compared to the United States, which defends itself and the world. The United States is bearing the lion's share of actual defense on the ground responsibility, armaments, production, deployment, and dues. Money for the defense of Europe. Fine, we're the superpower. We're the leader of the free world. We have to stand for the defense of liberty everywhere if it's going to mean anything here. Understand that. But many of these nations are allowed, therefore, to have these giant welfare states and open border immigration policies because they theoretically have all the money to pay for this because they're not having to pay for their own defense. Well, and they're never called on it. The entire life of NATO, no American president, look, I take this back. Most American presidents have, in official and protocol-related circumstances, referred to this circumstance. But they've never called out any of these nations who have been in arrears. It's almost a perfunctory-like statement, either at a NATO conference or at the United Nations or some such thing. But there's never any teeth behind it. Trump came along in the campaign and started attacking NATO as an illegitimate organization. It's not carrying its own weight, way too dependent on the United States. It's not fair. And going forward, they're going to pay up. They're going to pay their fair share. Well, of course, establishmentarians around the world were in shocked disbelief. This just isn't done. Things like this are not even thought, much less said. Who does Trump think he is? He doesn't understand. The rules are that the United States is the world butt boy when it comes to this stuff, because the United States is the wealthiest, richest nation on earth, and the United States must pay for everybody else. It's only fair. That's the kind of thing Obama believes. And all of these Western European socialists and democracies, they believe the same thing. And Trump's come along and said, screw that. And he told them again today to screw that. Audio soundbite number one. We have 2 bites of Trump in Brussels. They time everything when Trump's over there. This happened a little bit after 4 o'clock because they're 6 hours ahead. So they do everything late in the afternoon over there to make the major news cycle here in the U.S. This happened a little after 10 o'clock this morning.
NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years.
And they're standing there. They're all there. There's a big NATO conference. Trump's up there. He's headlining, and they're all standing there snickering. They're looking at each other, and they're kind of pointing at him. Not literally, but you can just see they're putting, what a doofus. What an absolute bupkis. This guy doesn't have the slightest idea of the world works. What a joke. You can see it on their faces. Trump was not finished.
If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves. We should recognize that with these chronic underpayments and growing threats, even 2% of GDP is insufficient to close the gaps in modernizing, readiness, and the size of forces. And I never asked once what the new NATO headquarters cost. I refuse to do that. But it is beautiful.
Whoa, let me tell you about that comment. That was Trump saying he thinks it is an outrageous waste what these people are spending on their headquarters. And if you get a chance, sure you either have or you will see video of the building, some of it as they're standing outside next to it. It's a palace. It's a modern day glass and what is not a palace in the sense of Versailles, but it's state of the art. And what is it? What's in there? Just a bunch of bureaucrats and diplomats spending everybody else's money, waiting to do what? I mean, how many people does it really take to be in an office building to administer what NATO does, which is nothing until a member nation is attacked? Except it does more than that. NATO probably gives away money. NATO probably does grants. It's probably engaged in activities way, way, way beyond its charter. And if I had to guess, I would say that NATO is just another in a long line of world organizations that's involved in the redistribution of money. Primarily the United States money. It's akin to the European Union. I mean, these people, they live lives of luxury and fortune and wealth and so forth. What do? Their countries are being overrun. They're standing idly by and watching their countries be overrun. They are purposely welcoming in the people who are engaging in terrorist acts like that happened in Manchester. In fact, let me give you some stark details on that right after this brief, obscene profit timeout. All you have to do is ask. I ask all the time. What, why, who? What does NATO do? You think NATO just sits around and waits for a war to break out or a member state to be attacked and they move in and defend it? No. Have you heard about the NATO Center for Climate and Security? Mission and vision. The Center for Climate and Security, a nonpartisan security and foreign policy institute with a distinguished advisory board of military, security, and foreign policy experts, envisions a climate-resilient international security landscape. This is a world which recognizes that climate change threatens international security, significant and unprecedented, and acts to address those threats in a manner that is commensurate to their scale, consequence, and probability. To further this goal, the Center for Climate Security facilitates policy development processes and dialogues, provides analysis, conducts research, and acts as a resource hub in the climate and security field. What a bunch of gobbledygook! Facilitates policy development processes. Not policy, but process. And dialogues. Yes, my friends, the nonpartisan the Center for Climate Security does dialogue. They provide analysis. They conduct research. They act as a resource hub in the climate and security field. From Reuters, just 3 days ago, NATO lawmakers warn climate change may worsen Middle East security risks. Climate change will worsen food and water shortages in the Middle East and North Africa and risk triggering even more conflict and mass migration with serious implications for the wider world. Lawmakers from NATO's Parliamentary Assembly said, "Good Lord, it's just another gigantic quasi-government." And notice here, climate change, which isn't happening. Climate change is causing potential threats, dire droughts and floods and thirst and hunger. Where? Why, just so happens to be in the parts of Africa that harbor militant Islamic terrorists. And they're going to have to flee where they live because there's no water and it's so hot, it's nothing but dust. And it's dirt and it's filth and nobody would want to live there. And so they don't. They leave. They want to go to Europe. And we in Europe must be prepared to accept them because we are suicidal good people. Now, I have the Dedocam on and it's up tight because I want to show you something. I've got a picture of the NATO building. This is the ugliest, the most unsightly memorial to I don't know what. This looks like a giant, I mean humongously giant airplane hangar. Here it is, folks. That is the new NATO headquarters. We're going to put a link to this photo at rushlimbaugh.com. That thing's bigger than the new Apple spaceship headquarters. This thing is just downright flat ugly. And imagine it populated with a bunch of diplomats and bureaucrats and other bottom feeders who knows where they're getting the money for their salaries and how they're living, but you know it's coming from us. What an ugly. I mean, who designed this? This looks like a miniature of an airplane terminal, say at JFK back in the 50s. Looks like something TWA would have. Except TWA's was much, much nicer and more modern appearing.